And people are underestimating how much people want to see a human face, especially for services such as medicine and then service-based work. Because a lot of these services are, you're talking with the human and that's what you're expecting. You're expecting to have that emotion, to have that comfort, of talking face-to-face with somebody. And then when you remove that, you're removing a big part of the field. And so I feel like for these fields where there's been like some talk about that, I think there's always going to be some security. Also, I know there was a huge talk about how surgeries were going to be taken over by robots. But then now they're realizing that a lot of technology needs a doctor to be with the robot in order to use it properly. So I think it's not more they're going to be taking over, but they're just going to become essential tools to help you.
Yep.
That's why I think, like I mentioned earlier, with this, huge disruption that AI is causing, we do need, programs or pipelines or, things to help not only like students better adapt, but also professors better adapt to how they can incorporate it while still making sure their students actually know the material.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Dulf Vincent Genis. I am here at the Center of Innovation in Teaching and Learning. I am right now a junior here at the University of Illinois doing my dual degree in Information Sciences and Data Science with a minor in Spanish. So today I am joined with number one. I'm here with Arted.
Hello, my name's Arted Gjata. I'm also a junior here, and I am studying Integrative Biology honors, and I am on a pre-med track.
Awesome. And I'm also here with Zia.
Hi, I'm Zia. I am a senior studying computer science.
Yeah, so first thing that I wanted to ask you guys was, I guess, let's start with, have you guys used AI just in general in your education? So we can start with you, Arted.
Oh yeah, I've used AI plenty. Last semester, I even had a course that was entirely based around using AI. It was Organic Chemistry 2, which on paper sounds like more of the standard cut, standardized learning course, but the professor decided to be innovative and then use AI as the center of learning. So we used it to search up many topics. We even used it to generate pictures, and overall it was an enriching experience. But obviously there was many errors and bumps along the way because it's still relatively new. But overall, it was quite an enriching experience.
Yeah, what form did it kind of come up with? Because most people these days are using like ChatGPT or some kind of narrow AI. Is there anything specific that your class kind of incorporated?
So the center of it was ChatGPT because the majority of it was we want to find more about these certain topics in organic chemistry and then these certain molecules, and we sort of had a basis topic that we would build upon, and then we would use ChatGPT to find out more about the topic to generate structures, and then we would also use like other imaging AIs to generate images, and that was one of the lowlights of the class because compared to ChatGPT, the imaging was actually a little bit harder to use and then gave more varying results.
Oh, I see. Awesome. And your experience here?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I've had several professors not only say that it's okay to use AI, but even require the use of LLMs like ChatGPT.
Oh, interesting.
So I've had classes where the professors directly said, you should be using all the resources at your disposal, including LLMs. I found that pretty interesting, and I think it's definitely very realistic as well. I think our professor even mentioned that specifically, saying he wanted us to be able to treat this like a real world project. And in the real world, we would have all these resources at our disposal. And that comes with, all the benefits, but also all the negatives that come with using LLMs and all the things you need to watch out for. So,
can you really quickly define LLM?
Yeah, so large language models, like, for example, ChatGPT. There are a few others online, like Claude AI. You do have to realize that these are large language models. They're based on recognizing patterns in language and regurgitating that. They don't have an intuitive knowledge on the subject area. And so I think I found them very useful in general for providing good outlines or, pointing me in directions I didn't even think of. But when it comes down to the details and actually like making sure that it's correct and that it's, it covers all the edge cases, I found that, I've just found that that's where the human part comes in. You really got to make sure you have an intuitive understanding of what you're using the AI for, or else you won't even know how to use it correctly.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah. And do you have a specific example of that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, for one of my classes, for example, our professor actually allows us to use AI to help us write our code. It's for my systems programming class, and our professor actually, asked everyone, if you use it, make sure to cite it. But yeah, I mean, we can just use it as normal. And what I've noticed, and what a lot of people have noticed as well, is I mean, obviously the professor wouldn't have said that if
Right.
AI could actually correctly solve the homework, the actually code correctly
No, of
for
course,
the
yeah.
problems. And what you find is that it's very helpful in the small things that are sort of non-intuitive. Like, I forgot what library I need to import into my code, in order to make this work, or like the syntax, right? But in terms of actually making the code efficient and making the code correct, it's unfortunately not very good at that.
Yeah.
So, that's why you actually have to learn the material, and that's probably
Yeah,
why
of
the
course.
professor was so comfortable letting students use it so freely. So.
Have you had that same experience, Arted, or any
I was
other
gonna say there are many
examples?
parallels from when I've used AI, where especially in biology, you're not often using it because I'll be frank, sometimes it's more of a pain to use AI for certain topics. So what works best, and then the few times I've used it, is to find a starting point.
Yeah, yeah.
Because when it comes to like as she mentioned, when it comes to the details, it's like still like in the works, so it rarely gets out any good details. So that's when the human comes in, like she said.
Yep.
And then I also usually use it to check more about a topic that I got wrong. So I'd go through the homework, and then once I get my results back, and if there's a topic that I'm a little bit confused about or I'm not sure where to find online,
Yeah.
I use that, and it sort of gives me more of a direction to go in to learn more and to correct my mistakes. So it's more of a check, and it's more of a study tool to supplement your learning.
Yeah, rather than just like a means to an end, like you're not just
Exactly.
using it to get answers.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah, no, in my experience, I've always had. I recently started doing a lot of like journaling, especially after my experience studying abroad, and I feel like AI kind of helped me a little bit with writer's block, because at the end of the day, the material that I was writing with was my own. But then if I was ever just like stuck, or if my brain wasn't functioning, then I could just have AI come in and just not necessarily write my things, but just, as you said, kind of give me that step in the right direction, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, it's just like the hardest part about writing, in my opinion, is the beginning. Because you need to start, you need to format, you need to organize. And oftentimes, at least in my experiences, even when I start writing, sometimes my beginning sends me in a direction that, even though I have all the ideas in my head that I want to portray them, just the way that I've started off makes me not want to portray them, and I'm ending up going back and then backtracking and restarting. But AI usually helps me like set out like organization. I can mess around with it, and then I still don't often use it, but when I do, that's the point of it.
Right.
Just to see how can I get started, how can I organize, and how can I use that to move forward, and then do it myself.
I will say something, a note of caution regarding that, though, is obviously, and actually there have been studies on this, and I found this very interesting, but it's been found that actually when programmers use AI to help them with their programming, sometimes they're a bit overconfident about their code, and it's more likely that it has errors than if they had written it themselves. And I do think that is a possible issue, because sometimes the outline may be wrong, not all the time, but sometimes it may be wrong. And I think a potential issue is that it can cause overconfidence, and you think that it covered all the cases it needs, but actually there are a few edge cases that it didn't think of. But you're just taking it as it is, and you're working from that outline when the outline itself isn't fully complete. So.
Right, and kind of like connecting those two ideas, like for example, writing papers versus writing code, it kind of just goes back. You kind of see that parallelism, especially when maybe back in high school, when we always like hand wrote our papers, for example. You never actually were overconfident on the paper that you just wrote like as a first draft. You always want to do like a double check. You always want to have someone else read it. Kind of the same thing with AI, where you don't always trust exactly what it writes. You have to do that. You have to reread it. You have to get it checked by someone else, or maybe just check it literally by yourself, because some people, as you said, Zia, some people just rely on the code that AI gives them, ChatGPT gives them, but not exactly just they don't exactly just do that due diligence in being able to kind of modify it themselves. But I feel like people are kind of a little bit more aware than that. That was definitely a problem when AI used to first come out, right? I feel like 3 to 4 years ago. So
I can even attest to that. I personally don't usually use it in my writing, but the majority of my use of it in writing came from this chemistry class. And then during it, a lot of times I'd have to use my own prior knowledge, because I would look at what it was giving me, and then I'd see something wrong, and then I just find out that sometimes it just brings up sources that don't even exist.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
It's like a common issue with it. And so I feel like the best way to use it, and then the proper way to use it, is to have your own prior knowledge, and that you're using that as a way to sort of build up upon it. So you need to know the material yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to be using it properly, and you're not going to be doing well in whatever you're doing.
Definitely make sure that you are verifying, what it's outputting, right? Obviously, there's, I mentioned the research on overconfidence. I definitely do think that is a big problem. I mean, I'm speaking especially as a computer scientist, right? I think mistakes are very costly. And in the real world, you don't have an auto grader automatically grading your homework, right?
Yep.
You don't know if it's wrong or right. And so it becomes so much more important to make sure that you don't have mistakes in the real world. So I think, it's hard to incorporate that habit as a student, because you're so used to being able to submit and right away know if it's right or wrong. And so it's okay if you make a mistake. You just submit it and see if it works. But, the real world is not like that. And so I think it's very important, especially in CS, to be able to verify what it's giving you and make sure you really understand what it's saying. But I think a second point is, obviously, don't let that scare you from using AI. Like, it's one of those tools that is so powerful. You just, it markedly helps you become more efficient, and just gives you so many resources and pulls up so many resources that you may not have, realized or learned or have even thought of thinking of exploring in the first place. So I definitely think that I wouldn't let, the downfalls of AI prevent, students from actually using it in their homework. And so I do think it is good to use it in your homework, because in the real world, that is, you are using all the resources at your disposal, but you are responsible if it turns out to be wrong or if there's a mistake or something. So I think those 2 points are pretty important.
So a big part of what I do as a biologist is running statistical tests. And then what I've seen from people is that when they're writing code for this, sometimes they need to refer to Google, or they need to refer to the database of the program itself. And then a good way to combine the two is by using AI. So if you need to run some sort of test, I've seen many people just ask what kind of test to use, how can I set it up, what's the code to make this graph the way I want it to be. And so that's just sort of a good supplement. But at the end of the day, you're the one who has the data, and you're the one who collected the data in a way to set it up. So you're just using that as a means to process what you have. And then I've also heard, which I guess Zia can attest more to from some computer science friends, is that AI has been really important for certain aspects of the projects. However, using it for the entire project ends up causing more harm than good. And then I've also heard that there's certain programs and certain languages that AI just doesn't work with yet. And so I actually had a friend earlier today was complaining about how he was trying to use this one language. I can't remember it, but he just said AI wasn't working for him at all. He just had to do it all by scratch. And then, so that's just one of the many trade-offs you have. But for the smaller parts, they've had plenty of success. They want to just optimize this one part of it, and then they've explained it to me. I don't know, so I got over my head a little bit, but I've heard in small parts it helps.
And you've been able to see that more in kind of an application sense, especially because AI isn't exactly maybe for if it was just pure raw coding, AI isn't necessarily part of your, for example, a full assignment. Like you're just using AI simply as a tool to kind of contribute to a piece of research for biology or whatever.
For myself, the most useful and the most use I've gotten out of AI is when I'm stuck on something or when I get something wrong. I look at it and it's really good for digging up information, because oftentimes when you get to the higher sciences, it becomes so difficult to figure out certain things because the more specific or the more advanced topics you're trying to learn, just they don't have like the really nice summary articles out there. You have to go into research papers, you have to go through all the jargon. They have these long lengthy papers, and then you want probably one piece of information hidden behind 5 pages. And then sometimes you have to go into the supplementals, and that's a whole other thing. It's like 40 pages. And so sometimes you just want to find it. And then AI is a perfect way to do that. Like, oh, I want to find this specific thing, and then I find some keywords, and then I can use these keywords to search into the papers.
There you go. Now, kind of moving a little bit away from kind of like curriculum, education, how have you guys kind of used AI in just kind of your normal daily lives?
I just mess around with AI. You can get it to draw like pictures and stuff like that too. Like you can do like a little like arts with like the dots and dashes. Sometimes what we do is that when we're trying to like just mess around, we copy and paste something from our homework and then we make it read it out as like a pirate or something. So it's fun to mess around with too. It's not only just educational based. And then there's like plenty of other like little things you can do to like sort of break it. But do like a little like funny like little translations. Like you can translate it back and forth. Like you can make it read something out to you as like a Disney princess or like as a pirate. So that's
definitely. I've definitely had my fair share of messing around with AI too. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I've used it from everything from, like planning trips, to, helping me write emails, to, I don't know, even, something that I've actually done is at home, with my little sister. I have a, sister, she's 8. And, sometimes me and her, like, take turns coming up with a story. Instead of just like reading out a bedtime story, we come up with the story. And so what we did once was we also like pulled up ChatGPT and we asked ChatGPT to add to the story. So it was a lot of fun, and it was it had some interesting contributions.
I've seen some YouTube videos that are just entirely just 20 minutes of that.
Yeah.
And they're just entertaining.
Just inputting and
Literally. It's just they go in there, they put in like some random junk, and then they're like, can you make a story out of it? And then it's 20 minutes of entertainment. It's like crazy.
Now kind of a little bit transitioning into the workforce, there's so many different ideas, but also we've kind of seen in statistics or maybe on the news where like, people are kind of threatened by what AI can do, especially since a lot of what AI can do can just literally be replacing skills that maybe people don't have, or maybe for employers literally replacing jobs, etc. I don't know, how do you guys kind of like view the development of AI, especially when it comes to the workforce? And you guys can choose who you want to.
I was gonna say, for what I've seen for the medical field, is that there's been a lot of talk of AI learning how to diagnose patients, so a lot of general checkup stuff maybe could be done by AI, and then it's already transitioning into a technological based checkup system with doctors doing like virtual meetings, and then a lot of talk has been like, now from virtual meetings with a doctor, why don't we just have a virtual doctor? And then you type in the symptoms and you find that out. However, I think that people are underestimating how much people want to see a human face, especially for services such as medicine and then service-based work. Because a lot of these services you're talking with a human, and that's what you're expecting. You're expecting to have that emotion, to have that comfort, of talking face-to-face with somebody. And then when you remove that, you're removing a big part of the field. And so I feel like for these fields where there's been like some talk about that, I think there's always going to be some security. Also, I know there was a huge talk about how surgeries were going to be taken over by robots. But then now they're realizing that a lot of technology needs a doctor to be with the robot in order to use it properly. So I think it's not more they're going to be taking over, but they're just going to become essential tools to help you.
Yep, a tool to improve and refine, not necessarily as a means of replacement.
I think a large thing people need to take into account more is just how much a human face is necessary for a lot of work. Because that personality, that humanity is what really makes a lot of work enriching.
Yeah, and that's very evident in the medical field, especially when it comes to how nurses interact with patients, how doctors interact
Exactly.
with patients, etc. Do you kind of have anything in your kind of
Yeah.
background that can kind of add to that idea?
Well, I just want to build off what you were saying. I mean, for example, just look at sometimes when you get on the phone with support and
Exactly.
you're met with the AI assistant. How many times? I mean, raise your hand if you've said gibberish so that you can get to
that's
a
me, yeah.
real
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I would just keep clicking like the phone. I'm like 0, 0. Let's go.
Right.
Today.
Exactly.
You have to wait until they say press 1 to talk to a real representative, and then you immediately.
Yeah,
start.
there you
Exactly.
go. Yeah.
Right, because a lot of the time, like, even with something as basic as like customer support, a lot of questions people have are maybe very niche, or they just don't want to deal with an AI asking them 5 different times to repeat their question. So I think there's definitely also like a long ways to go for AI to be able to like accurately answer everything, everyone's questions, and for people to be comfortable actually like talking to an AI.
And then I think it all circles back to education. I mean, well, when we need to learn AI first in order to use it, and so if there's this chance that AI is going to lay off people, then it's important that they're able to get educated in AI and then know what's happening, and then if they're entitled to know why they lost their job, of course, and then also understanding AI and the opportunities it can bring can also help a lot of people go into these specialties in order to prevent this sort of laying off. But yeah.
Right. So with that being said, then would you guys then say, to kind of close us off, that there is kind of an argument to be made that the more maybe schools or universities kind of restrict the use of AI, that may be setting them up for failure in the workforce?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be like the future. I mean, it's going to be a prevalent tool. It already is now. And then by limiting people's access to it and their use of it, they're going to be unfamiliar with this, but they can't avoid it. It's eventually going to make it out. And it's going to be even bigger than it is now. And then if people are limited in their experience it now, it's just going to come back to bite them later.
Yeah. Zia?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think schools need to be adapting to new technologies and not, ignoring and hoping they'll go away. And, because they're there. You can't like ask every student, never use this ChatGPT when literally everyone else in the real world is, at least trying it out. So, and I definitely do think that, you do see some schools or at least some professors embracing that. But yeah, it definitely can be hard. And that's why I think, like I mentioned earlier, with this, huge disruption that AI is causing, we do need, programs or pipelines or, things to help not only like students better adapt, but also professors better adapt to how they can incorporate it while still making sure their students actually know the material.
No, of course.
Like with like many things, you need to learn how to use it first.
Yeah.
And then you need to learn how to use it properly so you can make the best use of it. And so you're not with proper use, you're not taking away from your education or from other aspects, but instead you're enriching it.
Yeah, definitely things that are going to be, I bet, hot topics for for our current day. But definitely some things that are going to be at some point hopefully embraced. So yeah, so thanks guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, Arted here and
Thank
Zia.